Let the sky crash down, let the sky run. My lad, the shiny sky keeps it dark. Features to my face.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Goodrum Show with me, Chris Goodrum. As per usual, a big thank you to everybody that watched last week's episode of the show, liked, commented, all that kind of stuff. Yep, very, very much appreciated. Some comments that I haven't caught up with as yet, but obviously I will endeavour to do so as soon as possible. So yeah, last week's episode of the show I thought went quite well. This week is kind of a bit of a follow-on, insofar that obviously, as you can see from the title page, we're looking at the Thompson Brothers. Now, these samples were kindly given to me by a couple of friends that also watch the show, Richard Hall and James Burgoyne, and both of them are very much into the independent stuff that the Thompson Brothers are doing, Phil and Simon. Now, for those of you that don't know, Phil and Simon Thompson set up the Dornoch distillery. They apparently ran, according to their website, the famous Dornoch Castle Hotel Whisky Bar. Must admit I've never been there, so I couldn't say whether it was famous or not, but I assume it must have been, otherwise they wouldn't have said so. Anyway, so they were running the bar, and they've set up the Dornoch distillery in the shed behind the castle, I suppose. I mean, it's a stone shed, but a shed nevertheless. And they did that in 2017 after a fairly successful crowdfunding launch. And I suppose this is the thing about Dornoch and the Thompson Brothers range, is that because it was funded like that, it seems to have, what's the word, there's a very kind of tight bond, I guess, of aficionados that love what they're doing and that kind of thing. And this is obviously James and Richard being two of them, and wanted me to just do a review of their stuff, which I'm more than happy to do so. Now, Richard did give me a sample of the Dornoch, their own spirit, which is pretty young, it has to be said. I think I've had a few bottlings, or a few samples I should say, and they've been around about the 5 years of age. I'm not including it in today's episode of the show because I just wanted to look wholly at their independent stuff. I have kept the sample, and hopefully I will shoehorn it into a later episode. So I mean, I don't really know very much about the guys, it has to be said. I mean, so everything I know I've just either taken from their website or from what I can see, and it seems like they have a sense of fun. They seem like kind of couple of wacky kind of guys, judging by the artwork that they use on their bottles, very much in the style of boutiquey whiskey. We're kind of funky guys, kind of Richard Branson-y sort of stuff, which doesn't wholly appeal to me, I have to say. I mean, I am, as you, well, I'm a bit more of a traditionalist, but like I said, on numerous occasions, you know, it's not what the bottle looks like, the label, or the frippery, shall we say. It's the juice that's inside the bottle that counts, and that's what we're going to have a look at today and see what it is they are bottling. So alongside single cask or sort of batch bottlings of distillery casks, they also seem to do some blended stuff, which I've got a couple and I'm going to look at, so quite looking forward to this. Like I say, it's an independent bottling company that I don't really know very much about or have come across, so yeah, let's just take a look at the lineup then, shall we? Right, okay, so I thought I would start with the two blends. So this is the Sutherland Blended Highland Malt, aged 5 years old, 2023 edition, bottled at 48.5, I believe, bottled for the 20th anniversary of whiskyfun.com, and it is as follows: a blend of 100 litres of 2014 distilled Clynelish, aged in refill bourbon, which is 9 years old. 214 litres of 8-year-old Clynelish, also aged in refill bourbon, distilled in 2015. 64 litres of 5-year-old Dornock, distilled in 2017, matured in ex-refill Glenmoray sherry butts. And 5 CL of Gordon MacPhail's Rare Old Brewer 1982, 33 years old, bottled in January of 2015. 5 CL out of all of that? Yeah, right, okay. Is there going to be any sort of brewer characteristics coming through in that? It does make you wonder why they've used it. Maybe it's because Serge is a huge fan of brewer, or maybe it's because they had it. Who knows? I don't know. You know. Anyway, we shall see. Sample number 2 is the second of the two blended malts. So this is called Lowrie's Reserve, bottled at 54.7, and according to the blurb on their website, it has been bottled to commemorate a Jeep, I believe, which one of them used quite regularly, and I think it's fallen apart now. So yeah, let's see what I mean about being sort of a bit kind of off the wall. So this is a blend, so 20.5% Strathclyde grain, 28 years old, aged in refill bourbon. 19.9% of an unknown Speyside, 11-year-old, aged in refill bourbon hogshead. 51% of a pre-blended Scotch, 10-year-old, aged in a sherry hoggy. 8% SRV5, which I think stands for Station Road VAT number 5, which is their standard blend, I want for want of a better word, which had been finished in a ex-Australian Shiraz cask that had been given to the Campervan Brewery, who had put beer in it. So you know, an ex-Aussie Shiraz beer finish cask. Okay, fine. So like I said, bit off the wall, it has to be said. So that's the Lowrie's Reserve, and that's bottled at 45.7%. Then we're going to move on to the single malt. So this is a Loch Lomond Inchmurrin, 9 years old, bottled at 48.5%. It's 2 refill bourbon barrels, distilled in 2014 and bottled in July of last year. Next one we're going to be looking at is a Blair Athol, a 12-year-old Blair Athol, bottled at 50%. It is a vatting of a 2006 refill bourbon barrel with a 2011 distilled refill bourbon hoggy. So bottled in September of 2023. Penultimate bottling is a Glenrothes. Oh yes, my favourite distillery. Apparently this is bottled in the Era 502 series. Not entirely sure what that means. Well, I know Era 502 is a computer thing, but I don't understand the significance. Obviously you guys probably do. So bottled at 57.1%. It's a refill sherry butt with 13 months finishing in an Oloroso quarter cask. Just for the hell of it, because there's just not enough sherry character there to start off with, is there? So, distilled in 2006, bottled in September of 2023, it's 11 years old. And the final bottling of the afternoon is yet another Loch Lomond. This is a Croftengea. It is a 16-year-old, bottled at 50%. It is a vatting of 2 decharred stroke recharred bourbon hogshead, distilled in 2006 and bottled in November of 2022. So interesting lineup, I think. Hopefully this should give us a good flavour of what the Thompson brothers are up to. So let's just kick off with a bit of a blend then, shall we? Right, okay, so let's kick off with the Sutherland Highland blend. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Well, you kind of get that waxy Clynelish character, which not surprised considering how much Clynelish is in there. Unsurprisingly, I don't get any brewer smoke or anything like that. I mean, it's, you know, it's probably they did it because they could, I guess, is probably the thing. It hasn't really made any anything impact upon the nose. In actual fact, it smells more like a blend. It's got an almost graininess, a sort of fresh, crisp, almost citric, almost graininess, and I can only assume that is obviously the Dornoch coming through. Like I said, I mean, I have tasted Dornoch in the past, and it's always been a little bit too young. But I think in this instance, you know, blending it with something with a bit more weight and a bit more sort of oiliness, it's actually worked really quite nicely. It's not the most complex of noses. In actual fact, it's fairly straightforward. There's not a huge amount going on apart from the sort of waxy, oily, Clynelish character, this kind of crisp, fresh, almost grainy character. No real oak. I'm not getting a huge amount of vanilla. It's all very neutral, but it's pleasant. You know, it's a pleasant nose. See what the pal's like. Oh, now we'll get some oak. So again, it's fairly straightforward, it's fairly simple, it's kind of waxy, Clynelish, slightly malty, big chunk of coconutty oak on the mid palate. Again, lovely balance. There's that crispness, almost graininess, again sort of sharp apple, white fruits. Again, I'm guessing, well, I'm fairly certain that is the Dornoch coming through there. It's a bit short, it's a little bit neutral on the finish. It's almost kind of neutral grain spirit. It's not got a huge amount of complexity. It's pleasant. So yeah, I mean, I don't know what it's sold for. Hopefully not a huge amount because it's not that complex. It's pleasant, like I said, it's interesting. So yeah, nice starter, I think.
As far as
right, okay, so let's move on to the Lowrie's Reserve. So this is 45.7%. Let's see what nose goes on this thing, shall we? That's a nice nose. Dense. Again, waxy, fruity. Definitely getting the Shiraz berries and dried fruit coming through. A little bit of earth, baked apple. It's a nice darker fruit note coming through as well. Hops, barley, lovely, almost kind of musky, floral top note. In actual fact, I'm not getting a huge amount of grain. The grain seems to be really well contained within this blend, and it does seem to be showing a lot more kind of maltiness and cask character. Yeah. I mean, that's nice. That's got a lovely complexity to it, it has to be said. I mean, I'm not saying there isn't any grain, you know, noticeable in there. It does have a little bit of a nip, just right at the edges, just a little bit of freshness. Yeah, overall, I'm really quite impressed with that. I think that's a lovely blend. Let's see what the pal's like. Juicy, fruity, blackberries, baked apple, waxy apple, almost Hessian, earth. I wouldn't quite go as far as saying bung cloth, but there's that sort of slight Hessian kind of note, which is kind of morphing into a kind of almost dark shredded wheat kind of note, kind of malty, earthy. It's got a lovely natural kind of character. There's almost a little bit of almost kind of stout fruit. It's kind of, yeah, darker, stouty sort of fruit coming through on the finish. Toffee. Not a huge amount of vanilla, not a huge amount of sherry. There is a little dried fruit there. The grain is really only noticeable right on the aftertaste when it has that sort of little, just that little nip. Yeah, I like that. I think that's a really impressive blend, it has to be said. So yeah, hats off to them for that one. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 9-year-old Inchmurrin. Let's see what the nose gives us on this end, shall we? Yeah, that's a pleasant nose. Quite oily, sort of slightly linseed oil, young, rose petal, that sort of classic kind of Loch Lomond rose petal marriness, touch of straw, white fruit. Quite clean, not particularly funky, although Inchmurrin doesn't tend to sort of be as funky as some of the other bottlings that Loch Lomond do. It's got a nice delicacy, it's elegant. I mean, you know, I don't know how much this retailed for. I mean, as long as it wasn't too expensive, you could go, yep, that's a pleasant nose. Again, it's not the most complex of noses. Not a huge amount of oak again. This does seem to be a little bit of a theme happening here, certainly on the nose of their bottlings. I mean, admittedly, I'm kind of trying to draw broad conclusions from just tasting 3 samples, but so far, the nose of each of them hasn't sort of been a huge whack of oak, which is good. You know, it certainly allows the sort of, you know, the character of the spirit to come through. And certainly this has got plenty of Inchmurrin character, it has to be said. So that's that. Again, quite elegant, understated, white fruits. Again, it's got that slight waxiness, straw-like barley, tangerine, apple, a little bit of spice, a little bit of rose petal. Not hugely long, it has to be said. Spices kind of linger throughout towards the aftertaste. Quite chewy, quite malty. A little bit of fruit sweetness. Yeah, okay, yep, it's a pleasant Inchmurrin, it has to be said. It's not sort of, you know, it's not going to kind of like blow you away with its complexity. It's 9-year-old Inchmurrin at the end of the day, but it is rather pleasant. Definitely says Inchmurrin, not too much oak. Again, I don't really get an awful lot of vanilla or sort of toffee or any of that kind of character on the palate. So very much about the spirit, and yeah, that was pleasant. Right, okay, so let's move on to the 12-year-old Blair Athol. So, no sherry, let's see if we get lots of distillery character then, shall we? It's a bit raw, it has to be said. Getting acerbic, almost green fruits, almost sort of acerbic green Speyside fruits, although obviously it's not a Speyside, I know that. There's a little bit of malt, there's a little bit of honey, there's a bit of shaving foam in there as well. There's that sort of slightly kind of waxy, shaving foamy kind of, yeah, kind of not really loving this one, it has to be said. It's got that, I'm not really getting a great deal of sort of like, you know, weighty Blair Athol character, which is another thing, you know, so why do you think they sold these casks off? Yeah, I wouldn't have pegged as a 12-year-old either. It really hasn't actually sort of developed an awful lot. It's, yeah, not the most cleanest of Blair Athols, it has to be said. Let's see what the pals say. That's a bit industrial, it has to be said. I think if I didn't know what it was, I wouldn't have put it as a Blair Athol. It doesn't have the weight, it doesn't have the honeyed sort of richness. It's quite austere, it's quite sharp, citric, industrial, hard. You kind of think, wonder why this was a blending of 2 different casks. Maybe the younger cask was kind of like this, a little bit too austere, a little bit too rough. Let's try blending it with something with a bit of age. Let's see what, and it's not really worked at all. I think you probably should have finished it in a sherry butt or sherry octaves or something like that, because no, not really enjoying that one at all. Right, okay, so let's move on to the Glenrothes. So 11 years old, Era 502 series. Let's see what the nose gives us on this then, shall we? Well, would you be surprised if I said, sherry? I mean, you know, look at the colour of that. I mean, it's kind of absorbing the light, isn't it? It's a sherry monster. It's kind of walnuts, dark fruit, pepper, dark grape, black grape, raisinated fruits, and classic industrial Glenrothes character. I mean, it's like, you know, you'll never get away from the character of Glenrothes. You know, no matter what you do, you cannot submerge it. It will not. It doesn't want to die. It doesn't want to give up. You know, chuck whatever you like at it, and it will still come through. I mean, you know, if you like the style of Glenrothes, you've got to say, absolute classic. I mean, you know, like I say, when you taste it, when you taste something like this, you kind of, certainly if you're, you know, judging a competition, you kind of put your sort of likes and dislikes aside. You know, you go, yep, okay, that's not a style of whiskey I particularly like, but it's got sherry character, it's got distillery character, it's got balance, you know, it kind of ticks the right boxes, and then you think, well, you know, from a technical angle, it's perfectly good, it's fine. From a likability angle, it's, you know, it's always going to be a struggle with Glenrothes, it has to be said, but anyway, let's see what pass on. Oh, the tannins, the green wood, it's kind of just sucking the moisture out of my mouth, it has to be said. I mean, it is monstrously sherried. I mean, it is just raisinated fruits. I mean, they really have attempted to cover up the Glenrothes character, but I swear to God, you can still taste it. Certainly on the aftertaste, on the finish, you know, it has no finish. It's kind of masked to hell. The alcohol and the tannins have basically seen that finish off. It's Glenrothes, it's raw industrial spirit and big sherry. Let's try a little drop of water and see whether that calms some of the sherry down and we get a little bit more industrial character. Yeah, let's see. Not really, it's pretty much unchanged, certainly from the nose. A little bit more spiciness, I guess. A little bit more tannin, some dark chocolate maybe. But yeah, lots of that Glenrothes kind of character. So, like I said, from a technical perspective, you know, absolutely spot on. So that's right. Still sherry, still bitter, still Glenrothes, still raw, industrial, burnt bits. Kind of almost kind of burnt malt on the aftertaste. Why do people love Glenrothes? I really don't understand it. It is just hard work. It is not lovely. It's not gorgeous. It's not effusive. It's raw and hard work. All right, yeah, it's got character. Okay, yep, I will hold my hands up and say Glenrothes has indeed absolutely loads of character. And I'll finish it on that point. With a bridal oven upside down. Right, okay, so final whiskey of the afternoon. This is the Lowrie Croftengea. Let's see what the nose gives us on this one, shall we? Actually quite reserved. And you know what? Not very funky. I mean, this is kind of polite Loch Lomond. I mean, come on, you know, this is Loch Lomond is supposed to be all singing and all dancing weirdness, for God's sake. And here we have something actually, well, I mean, again, it's all about a question of taste, isn't it? I mean, I like Loch Lomond. You know, don't get me wrong. I like a bit of weirdness, right? No, stop sniggering in the back there. Okay, so it's got some barley. It's got some nice tarry peat. It's very soft. It's very almost kind of elegant. There's a little bit of citrus. It doesn't really say 16. I mean, and this is the thing with Loch Lomond. I find that Loch Lomond really never shows its age unless it's really, really old. It just kind of sort of seems to sort of stay in kind of stasis to a certain extent, you know, for about 20 years, and seems to be the same, you know. Maybe, you know, it's a bit like the sort of the picture of Dorian Gray, isn't it? But you know, it's nice, it's pleasant, it's got a nice balance of peat and fruit and sort of oxidised apple. Yeah, it's nice. That's what it smells like. Again, for a Croftengea, it is really polite. I mean, usually they're ripping your head off. They're kind of like, you know, screaming at you, sort of like, you know, ramming large chunks of earthy peat and rose petal mar down your throat, and you're just going, oh my God. This is incredibly polite. A little bit of barley, some citrus, or dare I say it, almost elegant. There's some peat there. It's earthy peat. There's a sort of a little bit of astringency there. Medium length, a little bit of spice, a little bit of oak, touch of heather maybe, you know, in the finish. I mean, it's a lovely whiskey. It's just kind of like not what you would expect a Croftengea to be like. So, you know, again, I suppose you can understand why the distillery kind of sold this particular cask on, probably with a few others that sort of, you know, weren't funky enough for it. And this is the wonderful thing about independent bottlings, that you know, you sometimes get to peer behind the curtain. You get to see things that, or sort of, the distilleries ordinarily wouldn't show you, you know, because as we well know, every cask of whiskey is a sort of a law unto itself. It develops as it develops. 90-odd% of the casks of a particular distillery will, you know, mature along a kind of a set line. But every now and again, you know, 10% maybe it's even more, I don't know. They'll just wander off on some kind of weird tangent, you know, and you know, if you back in the day, you'd probably never see this sort of stuff. It'd get sort of, you know, siphoned off and dumped in some kind of huge blended vat, and that would be it. So at least now you do get to kind of see these kind of weird and wonderful bottlings, or in this case not quite so weird and wonderful. So yeah, interesting. Yeah, nice. I liked it. I liked it. Right, okay, so let's sum today's episode of the show. Well, firstly, a big thank you to James and Richard for the samples for today's episode of the show. I think it's been really interesting. I think overall, I don't think that the Thompson Brothers are any different to any other of the independent bottling companies that are out and about there. Doing some interesting stuff. Yeah, some good bottlings, maybe not quite so good bottlings. It's kind of part and parcel of the whole kind of independent whiskey experience. The Sutherland, you know, it was all right. I mean, you know what? I mean, if somebody sort of bottled that for the 20th anniversary of the Good Dram show, for argument's sake, and there you go. Look, you know, that's an idea for you. Please don't bottle that, something like that for me. It just wasn't complex enough. I mean, I you know, I wouldn't want something ridiculously old and all that kind of stuff, but I would personally want something with a little bit more complexity than that. I mean, it's nice, nothing wrong with it. Yeah, okay, maybe Serge loved it, you know. So I'll hold my hands up on that one. Now, the Lowrie's Reserve, on the other hand, I thought was really very good, really complex, and this is, to me, this displays the the art of the blending. You know, it's all about taking the sort of the separate elements, bringing them together, yes, creating something quite interesting as a whole, but also being able to pick out the individual characteristics, the parts. It wasn't disjointed, it was, you know, really sort of harmonious and well put together, and just to me goes to show that, you know, that Phil and Simon are perfectly adept at blending. So yeah, really nice whiskey, I think. The single distillery bottling's Inchmurrin. Well, it was kind of Inchmurrin at the end of the day. It was sort of a good version of Inchmurrin. Quite happy with that one. Really pleasant whiskey. The Blair Athol. No, didn't like that one at all. I think that they attempted to rescue that one, but personally, I don't think you were ever going to rescue that particular cask. I think you would have probably been an awful lot better shoving it in some kind of different cask to sort of like finish it off in a wine cask, an ex-peated cask, a sherry cask, anything. That really wasn't a great Blair Athol whatsoever, I'm afraid. The Glenrothes, well, it was Glenrothes. You know, it was Glenrothes with huge amounts of sherry, and you know, nothing was ever going to cover the Glenrothes character. If you like that style, brilliant. That, you know, if you don't, you don't. You know, at the end of the day. And the Croftengea, yeah, again, pleasant whiskey, very polite for Croftengea. It wasn't going to rip my head off and, like I said, shove peat and rose petals down my neck. So yeah, different, interesting. So yeah, nice lineup, some really interesting stuff. If you kind of think that sort of what the Thompson Brothers are doing kind of like sounds like your kind of cup of tea, then obviously, you know, buy their whiskey, you know, support the guys, you know. I'm all for supporting the small guys. I believe that they have, that they're kind of building, shall we say, well, they're building a new distillery. I think they're calling it Dornoch South or something, I think. So they're obviously sort of attracting money, they're obviously attracting sales. Like I said, I think that because they were initially crowdfunded, they've kind of got this kind of core of die-hard fans that, oh my god, the word blinkered spring to mind, but I didn't really mean it quite like that, but would kind of like buy whatever they do, and that's that's not insulting. It's always, you know, if you support something, then great. And you know, there's obviously a lot of people that are supporting these guys, and it's allowing them to sort of like build their brand and build the distillery and enlarge things, which in this day and age of sort of huge corporate behemoths that sort of really don't give a monkeys about, you know, you the whiskey drinker. All they're interested in is the moolah and the shareholders. It's quite refreshing, I think. So there you have it. That's this week's episode of the show in the bag. Hope you've enjoyed it. No idea what I'll be doing next week. I'm sure it'll be fun, whatever it is. So until then, good afternoon and good dramming.
And if I fail, I'll have to die damned. I must assume for such a fate, the fire will always be able to crush, and will have to fight continue.